One of the biggest barriers to school improvement isn't strategy, it's identity. Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of your hosts, along with Shelley Steele. We're retired educators from Ontario who worked in adjacent school boards in restorative practices, and now we work with principals and teachers in schools in developing restorative practices in those schools. Our guest again this episode is Dr. Lisa Riegel, author of the book Aspirations to Operations. Dr. Riegel explains why teachers resist change when their beliefs and self-concept are tied to how I've always taught.
Hi, I'm Paula, an AI voice. This episode is brought to you by the phrase post-AI educational skills. In a post-AI world, transfer matters more than mastery. AI can already outperform humans at recalling information, summarizing content, generating first drafts. What it cannot do reliably is transfer learning across contexts. That means the most valuable student skill is no longer, can you do this? It is, can you apply this learning when the context changes? What this means for principals is that post-AI readiness is not about devices or detection software. It's about whether schools intentionally teach thinking about content, learning how to learn, collaboration and communication, emotional regulation, and ethical judgment.
Our website, www.restorative.ca, is for principals and teachers who navigate difficult conversations with parents, who want to make things right, and who want to make it all about student learning. If you have a question about that, check out our website, www.restorative.ca. And now let's join this conversation already in progress with your host, Shelley, and me, Stan. I wonder if you could speak to that whole idea of one of the obstacles to change is that, for example, if a teacher's not aligned with where a school is going, that their identity is tied into what they're already doing. And if you can tease out, like, how can, this is an adult to adult thing, how can a leader, a principal in a school, work with another adult who's not aligned with where the school's going?
Yeah, that's a great question and a huge barrier. When I work with leaders, I tell them that a teacher identity is like a pie graph. It's beliefs, behaviors, and identity. And we've had for the past 10 or 15 years in the high accountability movement where data has driven excellence. And to me, the moment we connected teacher quality to student standardized test scores, we made a huge mistake because teachers transitioned from I teach kids to I teach content. And when you start thinking about what kids actually need in a classroom, they need a teacher to teach kids. And so we have to have kind of a mindset shift. But when you think about that identity pie of beliefs, behaviors, and identity, if a teacher's beliefs are antiquated, they should do it because they did it 20 years ago and I don't know why they've changed, and they need to, a good teacher is a militant and they just need to listen, or whatever their identity of strong teaching is, they have their behaviors aligned to that. So the real challenge for a leader is to tear that pie graph apart and pull the behavior piece out of the pie and say, okay, beliefs and identity, what makes a great teacher? What makes us successful? And drive the human conversation and have examples of the human conversation. And that's where even that 100 ways in 100 days, if you're promoting teachers to do student-centered instruction or routines in their classroom that are student-centered, and you're highlighting that, you're then elevating, hey, this is what great teaching is. And then the teachers whose behaviors don't align with that are going to feel that cognitive dissonance, and they're going to say, I want to switch. And they will switch fast because teachers want to be good. They want to believe that they are effective. So I think it's shifting that idea of what is a great teacher and then being able to move the behaviors to align with them.
So it's not really challenging. Yeah, it's, let's talk about what makes a great teacher, not challenging what specific people do, because now we're going to get defensive about it. So we'll talk globally about what makes a great teacher and then align the behaviors, the pieces. Yeah, so you're not challenging their identity and what they do.
And one of the ways that I do this is I talk about schools. The purpose of schools is changing. Like initially it was to learn to vote, right? You had to read to vote. Then it was Renaissance man because information wasn't accessible to everybody. Now it is. Then it was job readiness and it was career pathway stuff, which is what we're in now. But with AI, all of that's getting super fuzzy. So we have conversations about, and I always try to make the conversations about kids, not about the instructor. And
Right.
so I'll say, what do you think the skills are that students need for a post AI world? Because content isn't king anymore.
No.
So if you're a teacher who's teaching content, you're going to be obsolete faster than you think. Like, we really need to say, what's the value add of having a teacher? And to me, it's the teaching kids. It's all the other things they need to learn how to learn. They need to learn how to love. They need to learn how
The
to
soft skills,
socially
as somebody
engage.
yeah, yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so then teachers will list that. And then I'm like, okay, how are you teaching and assessing those skills? And then it's dead silent. And I'm like, so that's this idea of teachers want to think. One of the identities of a teacher is I'm preparing my kids for their futures. If you're showing them, that's not what you're doing, isn't fitting with that, then all of a sudden they're like, what do I do? And then it's okay, let's infuse some of these skills into how you're teaching. And I actually have a high school right now that was talking about project-based learning and critical thinking. And I said to the principal, how do you define critical thinking? Again, that clarity. And he looked at me and I said, I would guess that if I asked your staff, every single one of them would have a different definition. And so we're actually next week, we have a late start that they're going to be working on this. And I said, your teachers need to have a clear definition and kind of create almost like a rubric of what's it look like when you're almost using critical thinking, or what's it look like, so that they can really assess where their students are and then provide those supports. Because just putting kids in a team and doing a project doesn't mean they learn how to cooperate. You have to have visible learning on that.
Makes me
When
think that we have to ask the schools that we're working with, Shelley, a
yeah,
little bit more. So what would a restorative school look like?
look
Yeah.
like,
And what would it sound like? And what would you notice?
right,
And
Yeah.
have
right.
them actually work through that.
Yes.
Because we're working with the leaders of a number of schools in a fairly remote school
Mhm.
district.
And I actually read an article the other day that was talking about, everybody's talking about student engagement right now, and the fact that absenteeism's up and student
Yep.
engagement's down. And it's no wonder that it's down, because if you think of like the motivation, so in social science, when you talk about motivation, it's an equation. It's the expectancy value theory. So I expect to do well and I value what I'm doing, then I'm motivated. So when you look at what we're doing today, and I think it really got worse during COVID because it's so difficult to do deep learning online, it just became compliance and completion. And so kids go to school and fill out a never ending road of worksheets and turn them in, or just do these assignments. And not only that, but the assignments they're being asked to do, they can go to Chat GPT and just have them done. So how are we, it goes back to that, like, what do kids need for their future?
Yes.
How are we designing our assessment so that it's not about the content, it's about the thinking about the content?
Yeah.
And if you're
Yeah.
just asking, and you can go all the way back to the rigor and relevance framework and all of those kinds of different things that people have been talking about for years. But I think we're at a real flashpoint because kids don't value what we're doing in school. And I would be hard pressed to find an educator who can defend in terms that would be acceptable to a kid, who can defend why we're continuing to do what we're doing. And usually the answer is because it's on the test. Well, the kids don't
Yes.
care.
You've mentioned something that I think is an important factor in education, that is parents,
Yeah.
and talking with parents. And the relationship that we as educators have with parents is very unique. How can you take some of this brain science and trauma-informed practice into conversations with parents, especially in conflict situations?
Yeah, for sure. So actually the last section of NeuroWell is all about that, about how to help parents. And there's a researcher named Herbert Wahlberg, and he created something called the curriculum of the home. And it's not hard. It's, expressions of affection, read together, discuss what you're watching in media. It's things like that. And then it's when you think about the emotional piece of kids, it's like, how do we understand the brain science so that we don't escalate the situation? So I'm actually doing a webinar at the end of the month for parents about this, and the idea of what to say and what not to say. You don't look at your kid and say, calm down. That doesn't work. That's going to escalate them. You need to figure out, how can you be a support to help them regulate themselves? How can you help set up positive practices? And one of the simple things is, and I started this when my kids were little, every day at dinner, I'd say, tell me two good things that happened today. And they couldn't do it. And I was devastated. And they'd say things like, I didn't get in a fight. I'm like, that's not good. That's the absence of bad. So what's good?
That's the expectation.
Right. But when you have those filters in your brain, your thalamus, where that's in control of those filters, they're stored in your amygdala, but your thalamus is your data manager. When the thalamus has a negative confirmation bias, it's going to look for things that confirm that. So if you have identical twins, the one twin, you say, how was your day? And the one with a positive would be like, oh, it was great. I started out really rough. I was running late. I spilled my coffee. I got junk all over my sweater. This really nice person helped me pick up all the stuff I dropped. And my friend gave me a shirt to wear today. And my colleagues were super nice about me being late to the meeting. Exact same event for the twin that's negative. It was a horrible day. I got up. I never got on track. I spilled my coffee. I ruined a shirt. I was late to a meeting, blah, blah, blah. They don't notice the kindness because their brain doesn't say the world is kind. And that's something for parents. Like, how do we create those filters? And I said it earlier, the solution to pollution is dilution. So, how do we set up those repetitive culture experiences in our home in order to make sure that our kids have a positive view of the world, a positive view of discipline, a positive view of criticism,
Making mistakes.
making
Yeah.
mistakes? Exactly. And I actually have two resources for educators. So one is obviously the NeuroWell has a section on this. I also wrote a book called Stop Doing What Doesn't Work. And it's more about parent engagement strategies as a whole for the school. And I'll share one quick story. I was working with a school and they were always complaining, and everybody always blames parents. So they were complaining, these people don't care. They don't come to our literacy night, blah, blah, blah. And I asked the principal, I said, so tell me why you decided to have the literacy nights and your parent events on Thursdays. And they were like, it fits with the basketball and the after school schedule. And I said, do you realize that's the day the food banks open in your community? And I said, so you're asking parents to eat one spaghetti dinner or feed their family for a week. And I'm like, what would a responsible parent do? And I'm like, and then after you have your literacy night, you send no follow up, no instructions, no anything. So the message you're sending is we're having an event. If you want to come eat spaghetti, it'll be fun. But you're not sending them the message. This is really critical for you to know to help your kid. So we reframed, what do you want parents to do in the home? What do you want them to know? How do we create a full engagement communication plan that is multifaceted? Some of it's in person, some of it's through maybe a weekly tip of the week. Some of it might be through conferences, and it becomes dripped throughout everything that parent does.
Often I'd be brought into either behavior management plans or particularly in safe schools, called to schools to meet with parents because guess what? The communication had broken down between the school and the parent. And these, whether you want to call them strategies, approaches, this is often my approach. And schools would see a difference in the parents, but yet people are doing the best they can do. They don't wake up wanting this for their children or for themselves, right?
And they may not have the learning themselves. And
No, absolutely. Never mind the
habits.
Yeah, the school experiences that they've had or their trauma and the power imbalance, all those things, right?
Yeah.
And it is, people see it as magic when you can talk to people this way. It's really just talking to people in a different way, a more empathetic way, and a curious way. I would often say to parents, so can you help us? What are some things that work for you at home? So you're already changing the power dynamic, right? Because they know what's going wrong. It's like reading the laundry list, and here's the expectations that go with that.
Yep.
They know that stuff.
Absolutely. And when you only call to tell them, yeah, your kid did it again today, it's okay. Thank you, Captain Obvious. What are you doing about it? So yeah, I worked with a school that was in the inner city. It was a very rough school. And they actually hired me because parents had been physically assaulting teachers. And so they were like, can you help? And I was like, okay. So we started a series for parents called Find Your Voice. And it started with about 10 parents, and it started to grow because in the community they heard about it. But one of the things that I said to the principal is, when you are a person who has lived in poverty your whole life, the systems that you interface with, the social systems, the hospitals, the police, they don't treat you with respect. And so you have learned, because we learn through repetition, experience, and emotion, right? You have learned that the only way you get attention is to scream, because they're not going to listen to you. So we did this series with parents called Find Your Voice. And I said to the parents, I'm like, okay, so you're angry. And I said, you have a right to be angry. You've had 5 principals in 3 years. and your kid's not getting what they need and you don't know what to do and you don't know how to help. And I said, so you have a right to be angry, but what we want to do is flip your communication around. What do you want to see happen after you go to this meeting?
Right.
Who are you having to talk to? And then how do you find your words in order to make that person do what you want? Because right now, coming in and clocking a teacher isn't getting you what you want. And in fact, it's now they've shut the doors on you, which is not what we want. And it was so funny because that was one of the schools I was deeply embedded in. And I would hear the parents in the parking lot when they would drop their kids off. And I'd hear one going, oh, you need to find your voice before you go in there. And it was great, but it started to build some skills in the parents because I come from the belief that parents love their kids. Maybe there's a few outliers that are just terrible people, but 99.9% of parents love their children, want what's best for their children, don't know how. They don't know how to give it to them. And so if we can come at the idea that they love their kids and we want their kids educated and we love their kids, then that's a great foundation to build a partnership.
Yeah, the common ground. Yep.
Yeah. But if you come at it like your kid, and I think a lot of the behavior planning is really about suppressing behavior. It's not about teaching kids appropriate behavior. It's about how do we, even with behavior plans where it's this kid can get up whenever he wants and leave the classroom. Okay. Yeah. But then they start to manipulate the system. So it's like how we're giving them an option that's acceptable, but also giving them the power to try new skills so that they actually develop those and they don't need to leave the classroom. And how do you change the context of the classroom so they don't want to leave?
A lot of times in education, too, we are judgmental. This is a
Yes.
bad family. These are bad kids. Or,
Yes.
oh, you have that family in your class this year? How can we help to change the approach of the leader and the teacher to
Yeah.
the other adults?
I think some of the stuff we've been talking about, when you come at it from a different perspective and you use some of these tools, and when you start to give genuine support to these kids and you show them, I want you to be successful, you set limits, but you give the kids some agency. So it's not always about, I have to come to school and sit here all day and I'm controlled and I have to just comply. And especially kids from trauma, like power struggle, it's like, all right, bring it on.
Have you heard me say that, Stan? I always say they know what to do with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Bring it on. I know what to do with that. Yeah.
Yep.
Let's go.
The minute you set up like I'm your boss, they're like, "Oh no, you are not." And the thing is, that's a strength. That's a survival technique in those kids. So if you can make them the boss of things like they're learning or the boss of positive things, the problem is we don't give them that replacement behavior. So I think sometimes it happens that you have to show some success first. It goes back to that like beliefs, identities, and behaviors. If you start to show some success in using this positivity, because I think there's a lot of teachers that are so punishment focused versus right agency, skill development focused, and even all the way down to kindergarten. I'm like, this kid was in a diaper a year and a half ago. Come on. Once you start to get your coalition of the willing to start to have success with those families and those kids, all of a sudden other people go, wait a minute, I'm making this a lot harder on myself, and they start to shift. I also think helping parents to understand the lived reality. We come from a very middle class perspective in schools. One of the things I did in a school is we canceled student parent conferences because nobody came anyways. And instead, we had the teachers go serve at the soup kitchen and you work at the food pantry. And so they logged that time. And then it was great because I could be like, hey, Johnny, it's good to see you. And he'd be like, hi, Mrs. So and so. And I'd be like, is that your mom? I'm like, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And so you're meeting them in a place they feel safe and you're serving them and you're getting a very different perspective of what that life looks like. Just back to the why would you schedule an event the same day as a food pantry? That sends a message right away. You don't understand me or how I live. In the one school I mentioned with the Find Your Voice series, the community wants the school to be strong because it's good for their real estate and their business and everything else. But the parents didn't trust the school, and I would argue rightfully. So what we started doing, we would make celebration cards. So I made I would just make it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet, cut it into 4, and it would have a celebration, something the school was up to, and a little like testimonial of a kid that we wanted to highlight. And I started doing a walk around, and I literally was like the only white person for miles. So everywhere I went was like that movie Werewolf in London. Like I open the door and everybody stops talking and looks at me like, who are you? What are you doing here? I'd be like, hi, I'm the white lady from the school down the street. And I went in and I said, hey, we really want to develop relationships with parents. You have somebody in your chair for 4 hours doing a weave, or you have people at the barbershop all afternoon talking, or these are your people. If we give you positive things to say about the school to support us, will you say them? Will you encourage people to come? And they were like, of course we will. And then we started inviting the community members to come in on parent night. So we had somebody who did like they did a really complicated weave throughout the night, and people could walk by and watch them doing that. We had a barber that came and the kids read a book and he cut their hair, and but we located it in the school. So now you've got somebody sitting in the chair and the lady might say, hey, are you going to the thing at the elementary school? I'm not going there. I hate that. But you have to come. I'm doing braids that night.
Right.
Oh, I'll be there. And
Right.
all of a sudden, we had all these people come, and then we had to train the teachers. How do you talk to them when they're here so that they're not walking in, again, behavior, biology, and context? And in the book, to your point about generational trauma, there's a section in there about epigenetics. And epigenetics is a really fascinating field of genetics that talks about how our environment can switch on and off genes, and then those can be passed to our children. And there's some studies that are really interesting. When you think about parents coming in, they have their own biology and their own generational trauma or situational trauma, whatever it is. So, what are we doing in the context? And when they come in and we lecture them and put them down and give them 4,000 things to do at once, I always tell teachers, if I come in and do PD with you and I tell you 15 new things you need to do, you're going to shut down. But yet we expect the parents to do it and then blame them when they don't.
Is there any last story or last comment that you would want to make, Lisa?
I know this is my body of work and I'm super passionate about it, but I truly believe at my core that if we're not attending to this, we're never going to succeed. And so you can spend millions and millions of dollars on curriculum, on aids, on support systems, on all these different things in a school. You're still never going to close those equity gaps. You're still never going to get the students engaged. And right now with AI and the changing purpose of school, there is never a time that has been more important for us to shift back to we teach kids, not we teach content, and to really redefine the way that we want to set up a context that's safe, supportive, and proactive. It really is a life or death situation for kids. And I don't mean that in a hyperbolic way. The way that we give them a school experience is building a very strong filter in their brain about who they are and what they can do. And we can either build them up or kill them. And we're seeing a lot of suicides are up. We're seeing attendance going down. We're seeing a lot of signs that we are not creating a context that helps kids be the best kids they can be.
Dr. Riegel explains how biology plus context shape parent-school conflict and how schools can reduce escalation by understanding regulation, perception, filters, and generational impacts. And she gives us some very practical examples of meeting families where they are and redesigning engagement plans, leveraging community partners, and replacing blame with a relationship-based strategy. So what resonated with you and what challenges do you face? Send me an email to stan@restorative.ca. Kids over content. AI has changed the world of education, and a relationship-based restorative approach is needed now more than ever. But how do you do that? Well, send me an email to stan@restorative.ca and let's have a conversation about relationships and brain-based learning at your school.